What is an everything bag? It's a bag that holds everything that you own at a point in time because you had to leave your other resources behind because there was a threat or a reason to do so. A very undesirable situation to be in. But an everything bag has, or at least should have, your essentials and things that are the most important to you. There's many different approaches to this concept. In this video, we're going to be looking at this more as an exercise and a challenge. And so I have examples of items in my everything bag broken down into categories that I want to now share. Special considerations. If you or someone that you are providing care for has a medical need for certain types of medicine or medical supplies, this will need to be thought through, and space will need to be available in your bag. For some people, if you don't take certain types of medical treatment on a regular basis, your condition or disease will become a much larger issue. Because of this, we have to really look at what are we going to do when we run out of this medicine or medical supplies. I think a big one, and one that has been in question for a long time, is how do you deal with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, where someone is in need of insulin. And insulin has a limited shelf life. And to get the most time, the most shelf life out of insulin, from what I understand, it requires refrigeration. This is a major problem if you're out in the middle of summer on foot in the middle of the woods trying to get to safety. And it may require a long period of time, an unknown variable. So thought may have to be really put into this of making sure that you move into a direction, what you consider safety or a point of safety that's going to have these products that you need. It's not going to be a given that pharmacies will be well stocked where you're going, or that they're going to be well stocked in your area or even outside your area. And this includes the hospitals and everything. There may be such a disaster that resources are depleted, or maybe at least the resources that you need could be depleted. So you may have to plan for this scenario. This is not an easy situation to plan for, but this is where having a network, having a community that you work together really becomes very important. So it would be my advice, though, that if you are of a medical need, if you have someone in your group or yourself that is very dependent on certain supplies or medicine to stay alive, if you're just medically fragile in some way, it would make a lot more sense to probably stay with the group than to venture off by yourself. Another thing to consider or to think about is if you have eyewear, if you're reliant on eyewear to actually see. Some people have some really bad vision. And if you're that way, or maybe you don't have really bad vision, but without corrective lenses, you really can't function very well. So that's really a top priority. So if you have corrective lenses, then you would certainly want to have an extra pair put back. In my opinion, I'd probably have at least 2 put back if you have that available to you. So this includes just standard, eyeglasses and contacts. So of course you can pick one of each, or you could do 2 of one or 2 of the other, or you know how it works for you, but to have backups. And the same thing goes for if you have a hearing aid. This is going to be very important to have spare batteries for that. And if you do have a spare set of hearing aids, I know that most people don't because they're so expensive, but if you just have an old pair even, that if it can help you in any way, in case your primary ones get damaged, that's going to be a lifesaver too, because not being able to hear is going to really dramatically reduce your ability to stay safe. So you want to be able to see, you want to be able to hear, and you need your medication or whatever medical supplies to keep you functional. And what about orthotic insoles? Some people have custom insoles, prescription insoles. Some people have over-the-counter insoles. If you use these products and they help you, you want to bring them with you, obviously. And if you have an extra pair, an extra set, bring them. For me, I'm lucky that I can get over-the-counter orthotic insoles, and I can kind of mold them to meet my needs. I don't have extremely flat feet, but orthotics, they do help. And so what I've noticed wearing them over the past few years is that it takes some of the stress off my knees because it correctly aligns my feet and gives it the support it needs. And because my knees aren't hurting as much as they used to, my hips don't hurt as much. And when my hips don't hurt as much, my back doesn't hurt. And when my back doesn't hurt, my neck doesn't hurt. So for me, it's a chain reaction. And if you're carrying 50 to 60 or more pounds on your back in a backpack, you're going to want as much support as possible. And that includes taking care of your feet. So you want your feet to stay dry and clean and supported. What about extreme climate, extreme weather systems? If you live in an environment that does have that has swings of either extremely hot or extremely cold, or maybe you live in a place that just has really high winds or whatever it is, it's very volatile and it can be life-threatening, then you really need to plan on how to deal with that. So the obvious is going to be the first element of shelter and protecting yourself, having the appropriate clothing. For some people, maybe a very small collapsible stove, not so much to cook from, but to actually set up in your tent to provide heat. A campfire might not be enough. There are certain situations that you need a fire in your shelter. It's just that cold. And so I would certainly research and study how to survive in extreme environments, because you may have limited resources and you may have to rely more on technique and skill to survive instead of material support. Fire starters. The typical lighter might not work if it's negative 30 degrees outside. There was a few winters back, I was trying to make a bonfire in my side yard of the property, and the darn lighter wouldn't even work because it was so cold, it froze. So you have to know the limitations of your gear. And so for some people, small flares might be the way to go to get a fire started. Just make sure you have tinder. And if you're going to a location or moving into a location that has really no fuel, like there's no trees, maybe everything is covered in like ice and snow, you may have to bring some fuel with you because there may not be anything around. And so as you can see, in some situations, the weight of your pack and the bulk of what you have can get really outrageous very quickly. When you have to bring everything with you, when you have to bring all your resources with you, it becomes a world of hurt, in terms of dealing with all this, just trying to manage it all and trying to bring it with. Now, it's a lot easier if you can put some on your back and put some in a wagon and pull some of your gear. That is an option. But because of this video, we're just kind of trying to make it as simple as possible. We're just kind of looking at it more from the perspective of one container and how are you going to manage that. And in most cases, most people are going to put that container on their back. But you could certainly have a chest pack. You could have waist packs. You could possibly have some type of wagon system. But everything points toward having a system that you can transport. At the very minimum, it needs to be something that you can move from point A to point B. And that includes being aware, just being cognizant of your environment. If the terrain is all rocky and there's no way that a wagon system can be even pulled over this terrain that you may have to encounter, then it doesn't make sense to have a wagon system. You may have to have something else. Defense. We're going to look at that a little bit more here and just look at danger, the aspect of danger. If you are in a situation that you find yourself like in a conflict zone, maybe there's a war going on in your area, God forbid, having a small arms like a handgun or pepper spray as a non-lethal or something else that's very minimal may not be enough to do anything to counter a threat at a distance. You might have someone with a sniper rifle that is a quarter mile away picking off members of your family. And if you don't have anything to repel that person or stop that person, then you're all going to die possibly, especially if you're caught out in the open field. That would be very bad. So if you're in a high threat environment, even though for me in my everything bag, I do not include a long arm, but I would if I was like all of a sudden caught up in a war zone. But to keep things light as possible, I do not, in my system, keep a long arm with my bag. I simply have a handgun. And so you're going to have to figure out if that's practical for you at all to have a long arm. In a war zone, though, or a conflict area, you may not be able to travel very far or, go distance very much per day. If you're only going to move a mile or two a day, you can probably deal with extra weight. So the extra weight could come in the form of a rifle, extra magazines, ammunition. That right there is going to at least be 10 to 15 pounds. Okay, let's just say you have a very light, maybe an ultra light AR-15 at 5 pounds, a few spare magazines, and some ammunition. You can see that really adds up fast. Now, this would be a scenario that if you have a wagon system, if that was an option or something that you can pull along, you could certainly carry a lot more ammunition and maybe even put your long arm in that system. Okay, let's talk about portable wealth and the ability to barter and trade. So we have paper currency, but in a national crisis, maybe the currency collapses. So you would probably want to have some, but I wouldn't, if you have a safe at home, for example, and let's just pretend that it's full of cash. Wouldn't that be great? I would take a little bit of it, but I wouldn't fill half my bag with cash because it really isn't going to help you with your basic needs. Maybe at first, some people might accept it, but it might get to the point that no one wants it, and then you're just really in trouble. So maybe a few $100s, maybe a few $1,000s in cash. But what about if you have other options like precious metals, silver, gold, platinum, maybe a few ounces of each? If you have it, not everyone has those things, but if you do, people sometimes message me about gems and diamonds. Well, I don't even know anyone that has just gems and diamonds laying around. But if you're just someone that has that, it is kind of small and portable. It might not be the worst thing to have. But I wouldn't rely on that for barter and trade. Instead, for barter and trade, you might want to bring things with you that are going to be considered very desirable, rare commodities, in-demand commodities. And I would probably go with things that are the lightest and the smallest that I own in excess. For example, if you have small flask of whiskey or alcohol, if you have extra packs of lighters, if you have batteries, if you have extra medicine, I would probably never trade ammunition with anyone because it could always be used against you. But I would certainly try to have at least a pouch or a little bag system that has some items that you can use for barter and trade. And it'll keep you from having to barter and trade some of your essentials for things that you really need as well. So you don't want to give up all your fire, making capability just to get more food, because you may need that fire starter and that tinder tonight to survive. So you got to think about all this, and it doesn't have to take up a lot of bulk or weight for your barter and trade items, but I would certainly maybe leave at least a few pounds for that. What about animals? If you have a pet. For me personally, though, if I have pet birds or pet lizards or pet snakes or things like that, I'm just going to have to let them loose in the wild and go on my way. They may not survive in the elements at that time, but you have bigger problems to deal with. Now, if you have a cat or a dog, for a lot of people, there's a lot more of a connection. Some people feel like that they're really, part of the family, and they are. And I'm not saying that birds and lizards and snakes aren't part of your family. Any pet can be a member of the family. So I don't want to minimize that. But I do want to say, though, that it's sometimes harder for some people to just surrender their cat or dog. And I get that, because at least in where I live, most people have those two animals more so than any other animal as pets. Cats are really good, though, at survival. They have great survival instincts, in my opinion, a lot more so than dogs. So I would probably feel pretty comfortable if I owned a cat to just let it outside and let it, fend for itself. It would probably do pretty well for a bit of time. If not, it might be just fine long term. But dogs do struggle quite a bit. And there are some dogs, though, that just can't handle the code. I'm not saying that there aren't cats that would have a hard time in 0-degree weather. I'm just saying, though, that they tend to find some way, though, to get shelter. They seem to be a little more survival minded. But there are certainly breeds of dogs that survive in the heat. That don't do very well. They may not survive in the heat or in the cold. So we have to take precautions. If you want them to stay with you, if you're gonna bring them with you, because if there's gonna be any animal to bring, a trained dog, especially if it's a guard dog or at least a dog that has some type of obedience training, that might be an asset. You might want to bring your dog with you if it can be used to help protect you and your family, or to alert you of danger or threats. It could just be something to consider. It could also be such a hassle, and maybe you don't have the time or the resources to deal with this, to deal with keeping your dog with you, as sad as that may be. And it is heartbreaking to even think about that. But you may have a situation that your pack is already maxed out and there is no room for dog food. There is no room for a dog bowl. There's just no room for any more. And especially if it's a very event critical situation that you have to leave like right now. And maybe it requires you to be really quiet too. Maybe there's something going on that you don't want to draw attention to yourself. Well, the last thing you need is your dog barking and blowing your cover. You could muzzle your dog. You could do a lot of things, but it just depends on the situation. Hopefully you'll be able to bring your dog with you. And of course, there's always that possibility outside of our scenario here that you could have your vehicle. Your vehicle could be an option if you own a vehicle, and you can use that. But in this particular video, we're just talking about going on foot with your everything bag. In closing, I just want to mention some considerations about family stuff. That's what I'm going to call it here, family stuff. And, it could be a lot of things, but it's going to be mostly focused on kids. If you have kids, it's not to say that you can't have a family without kids, but I'm talking about, a couple, or even a single parent that has kids in particular, just the classic example of a family. And you have kids. What are you going to do? How are you going to protect your kids? How are you going to keep them safe? How are you going to meet their needs? Because they're not going to probably have their own everything bag. So you're going to have to figure out how to get some of their stuff in your bag. And hopefully you have a partner that you can share. You can do 50-50 maybe, or some kind of equation. In a worst case scenario, if you're a single parent, you're going to have to put everything of your kids' stuff and your stuff in one bag. And that's going to get really complicated and very difficult very quick. You may be limited just to maybe one change of clothes each. Things get kind of dramatic real quick. So the question is, should you put toys or games and things in there? I think it does make sense to have at least one distraction that you can give to your child, especially if you come into a very stressful situation and you need them distracted. Something needs to be provided to the kid. You can't just, expect a child that's already stressed out just to be quiet 24/7, So you're going to have something. I would pick something that's very compact and extremely lightweight that can be reusable. Maybe a coloring book. They have compact coloring books, maybe a very small packet of crayons or something. That to me is something. Unless they have like a favorite book if they're obsessed with a favorite book, maybe bring that book with them. Or if they have a certain stuffed animal that they like to play with, or some kind of toy that's compact, maybe take that. You would know better than I. Documents. Okay, now we kind of touched upon this a little earlier, but you need documents for your kids, not just their birth certificates, but their health records. And when possible, too, you should have copies of your own health records. Now, a lot of people don't even ask their doctors for their own records, but you can ask for copies of your own records of medical records. And this is pretty important here because, in particular, if your child has some type of issue, some kind of medical issue that they're currently going through, you're going to want to have all the details of that. So if they ever need medical care, and hopefully you'll find that care if it's needed, that the medical specialist, whoever they may be, a doctor, nurse, first responder, will be able to kind of understand their situation. And then you can help them understand because you have all the details. Because even as much as parents know about their child, sometimes you don't know all the details just right off the bat. Especially if you're stressed out, you may not be able to just remember everything that has happened to your child, especially if your child's had surgeries or procedures, things like that. Special foods. This is a part that we have to be mindful of. Allergic reactions. We have to think about foods that give us issues, not only as adults, but also, for our kids. A lot of kids just don't eat certain things because they can't handle it. Their stomach gets all crazy. So just pay attention to the foods that your child tolerates well, and for yourself as well. Like, you should know what foods that if you ate them, you would be okay, even if you're stressed out. Because I know there's some foods that actually calm me down and settle my stomach and make things better instead of worse. So know what those are. And I would probably include those when possible in your bag as part of the food that you bring, because this is just kind of my philosophy. I would not bring a lot of spicy food, stuff that could mess my stomach up, Okay. Carry systems. This is going to be the big question for those parents that have children, especially really young children that can't walk miles and miles a day, or maybe can't walk at all. How are you going to carry these kids, or maybe a child? Is it going to be a wagon system? Is it going to be maybe some kind of chest harness, some kind of carrier that you can put on your chest or your back? How are you going to carry your other gear? These are things you're going to have to kind of test the waters. Maybe now, of course, or in the near future before you ever have to make this choice. But are you going to be physically fit enough? I mean, are you physically fit enough to deal with all this, to carry your child and a backpack? I mean, and maybe even point a wagon. I mean, can you really do this? This is pretty intense. A lot of people in first world countries are not in very good shape. I mean, there are certainly people who do construction work and, builders and all kinds of things that honestly, they might be in really good shape, but they might be one of those, anomalies too. I think there's not like a bunch of people that are really in good shape. You might be in okay shape or average shape, and that might get you through. That's actually not the worst if you're just in average shape in terms of being healthy. I'm not saying like the average health in the world, because the average health, like even in the US, is not so great, but just the average healthy range. But if you're kind of like the average person here in the US that is overweight and just has really poor conditioning, that could be very dangerous. And you really may want to increase your endurance, your physical endurance. Today, I just went ahead and put my backpack on, my everything bag, and I walked around for a while. My neighbors were probably wondering what in the heck is going on. Thankfully, though, I live in a location that there's very few neighbors. Only maybe one couple may have saw me. I think maybe it was like just one set of neighbors. I think that's about it, if even at all. Maybe they didn't even see me. I don't even worry about it. But I just walked around, and my yard and just checked some things out around the property, got my mail, and I'm walking around with my backpack. And at this particular point, my bag it's a little too heavy, but I went ahead and just walked around anyways, just to see how I do, with like a 30-minute, walk around with the bag. And, I did okay, but I was starting to feel quite a bit worn out. I'll be honest. And so that just means two things. I need to get in better shape and I need a lighter pack, just pull some things out. And so that's difficult because, I don't want to pull things out. I'm sure you don't want to pull things out. When you think that you've got everything, in there that you want, like you're good and happy with it, only to find out that it's 10 pounds too heavy, it'll drive you crazy. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm about like 5 to 7 pounds over. And I think over the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to probably figure that out. But there's a few things that I do not want to remove, but I think that it's possible that I may have to, like my tomahawk. And I have a little bit of a redundancy in my sleep system and in my shelter system. And I may have to remove a little bit of that, but, I'll figure that out. When we talked earlier about medications, I just want to kind of just real quickly emphasize under family stuff, kid-specific meds. Because sometimes the dosage is very much different than an adult dose, or maybe there's a certain type of medicine that pretty much kids use more than adults. It might be a more rare thing. So definitely don't forget, even if it's just some over-the-counter meds for kids, it might be that much more important to have it than, trying to figure it out, how to, break the dosage down from an adult dosage to a child dosage. And once again, there are some things that kids shouldn't even have, because it's more dangerous that adults sometimes take. And so I think that just across the board, just having a little first aid kit just for your kids, if you have kids, is going to be really ideal. And you can even store, even if it's just like a Ziploc bag with kid meds in your main first aid kit, if you didn't want to have two separate first aid kits, which that makes a lot of sense, really. As you can tell, I don't have kids. So I'm just trying to think, in a larger way that might appeal to more people here. So definitely, better than I what they need. So just put those things in the bag. And of course, we have child-specific survival items. That kind of sounds a little odd, I know, but there's some things that kids really do need more of than adults. It could be sun protection. Adults need that too, but you have to be really careful about kids. I remember growing up, going on the beach and stuff and getting some pretty bad sunburns. It's not like, adults don't get sunburned, but man, I was torn up. And so we got to be real careful to protect our kids from excess exposure to the sun. And other types of survival items would be really just to focus on keeping their core body temperature stable, just making sure that they have the nutrition they need, because kids are growing and they're in the middle of their developmental stage of becoming an adult. So it's like they need certain nutrients. This is so important. I would really research like a very high quality multivitamin, multi-mineral even for your child. So if you come into a situation and they're not able to get enough food to get all their nutritional needs met, you can at least help to supplement that. But certainly try and get enough of their caloric needs, just enough calories is going to be big too. We all have to have a certain amount of calories just to maintain our weight and to live. That's a no-brainer. But, when we're talking about our kids, man, they're growing and they need calories to grow. They need nutrition. So it's going to be really important to figure out how you're going to feed your kids, and to bring that much food in your bag, especially if you're a single parent and you have several kids. It's going to be really interesting how you're going to figure that out. Just for my own system, it was difficult enough just to put stuff in there just for myself, just to have enough, room and just to deal with the weight of, so many pounds of food. And that food won't last forever, and so you're going to have to figure out renewables. That's why earlier you saw I have a rod and reel. Definitely you want to consider if you have the skill to trap, to hunt, to fish, to barter and trade and so forth. I mean, definitely wild edibles is going to be something that you really should look into. Okay, so that's basically what I have here for this video, the everything bag concept, exercise, challenge. I hope this was somewhat interesting and enjoyable, just something to think about. You may never build an everything bag. For some people, as far as they're willing to go is maybe a bug out bag or a get home bag. For some people, they've built an inch bag, an I'm never coming home bag. So if you have an inch bag, it's very similar to an everything bag. It's just that a lot of people, when they build their inch bag, they're trying to literally survive indefinitely. At least that's supposedly a goal for some people. And there's such a high emphasis on basically tools and other things that there's a little bit less focus, if not, in some people's, inch bags that I've seen, less focus on just the full spectrum of life. And they're not really walking through their entire house and collecting their most valuable, precious things. And so for some people, they're going to have a lot of different things than what you would find in an inch bag. And so what I think of an inch bag is like a long-term survival. It's almost like a hybrid between like a bushcrafting or a bushcrafter pioneer bag, ultra long-term survival bag. That's kind of how I think of it. Everybody has different definitions for some of this, but an everything bag is more of, you may never see your home and your possessions again, at least the possessions that you leave behind. And so you're just grabbing everything that really you don't think that you can live without, or that for sure that is essential. So you're grabbing those things that you really believe that are essential, that you may need. And it's very difficult because some of us have a lot of stuff to pick from. So this is the challenge. And some people say, why can't we include those items, that we can get at the store? Well, because we're just focusing on what we have now. Now, if you go tonight and you get some new supplies and you have it in your possession, then you can use that now to put in your bag, of course. But this is just to get you thinking, because this is kind of like something that could happen to some people. I personally think it's going to be kind of unlikely that most of us will have to do this or have to deal with the prospect of having to leave our homes and facing a complete total loss of whatever we leave behind. But there are people that evacuate, right, from a hurricane coming, and they come back to their home a week later and there's no home left. Everything's gone. This does happen. This is not like a pie in the sky dream concept. Earthquakes happen. There's some stuff that really is crazy that goes on in this world that's been normalized. It's just always been going on. Now, in some locations, it's very calm and quiet. Hopefully you live in those areas, but some people live in very active areas. And some locations in the world get hit by multiple natural disasters at the same time. Can you imagine having an earthquake, a tsunami, and maybe a hurricane within like a short period of time of each other? That would pretty much kill a lot of people, if not the most, the majority of the area. I mean, it's possible. It's a major threat to have multiple large scale disasters back to back. So, being a human being, we're fairly fragile. A lot of people like to see how robust, and we are in some ways. We're fairly resilient as a species, but individually, though, we're fairly fragile. Like, we're just these creatures that we need certain temperatures to really function. Otherwise, we can die in a short period of time. We have to have food in a small window of time. Within a few days to a few weeks, most people start to just not function. But there are cases of people lasting many weeks. I mean, it's possible. It just depends on your body weight and everything like that. And of course, there's so many people nowadays, as we talked about a little while ago, that are so dependent on the medical system to keep them alive that if there isn't certain types of interventions on a regular basis, they will not be able to function and they will probably die. I mean, just think about people on oxygen. Think about people that are in the hospital. Can you imagine being in the hospital trying to recover from a major surgery and the grid goes down and society collapses? I mean, that would just be really bad luck. You have a very low chance of probably surviving, especially if everybody evacuates the hospital and they leave you there and you're just going to try to fend for yourself. And maybe you can't even walk or even think half straight. Maybe you're under a tremendous amount of pain from the surgery. There's a lot of nightmares that will happen. And historically, this is how it's been. You know, people like to sometimes romance war or these time periods in history of famine and disease. Sometimes it gets romanced, and I don't understand that really. I have a hard time looking at it that way. But I don't know, maybe people, cope in different ways. But some people like to romance war, and they don't realize the horrors of war. You see all these people that almost like glorify war with video games and all kinds of, ridiculous stuff. And while it may be entertaining on some level, the realities of what really that they're talking about, they know nothing of it. And so it is my concern, it's a great concern that people are going to be so shocked at the horrors of war and starvation and suffering that people all around us will just give up living. The will to live will be surrendered and they'll just sit over in the corner and just die. They'll just give up. And we see even what's going on at the time of this video, that mental health isn't so good right now across the world with all the lockdowns and all of the various things going on. A lot of people are committing suicide. A lot of people can't cope with the isolation or just the ongoing fear that's being projected from various sources. And you know what I'm talking about. And just the fact that I can't speak openly on this massive international platform should tell you something about where the world is going. So to think that it's not going to probably happen, and if it does, it's a long way away, I think that we have a great possibility, a great potential of very, very high levels of, I don't know what else to call it, bizarre or craziness that is coming down the pipeline. And I think that now more than ever, we should be as prepared as much as possible. I think you should go out of your way every weekend or whenever you're not working or doing things that are essential to prepare. Because even if you never use it, you have it as a backup. And in some ways, you will use most of the stuff. For example, if you buy food and there is no emergency, you can always eat the food. And with the rate of inflation going on these days, it's almost like an investment. You buy food now, a few months later, it's going to be that much more expensive, but you don't have to pay that expense because you already have a stockpile. And if you feel like you need to eat on that a little bit, then you can. So preparedness gives us opportunity and it gives us flexibility. It gives us some peace of mind. We're not so strung out on the news and worrying about, how are we going to deal with this and that? Well, you don't have to worry about a lot of this at least in the short term for most of preppers, because you have solutions all over the home. You have solutions everywhere. You know people with solutions. And if your solution isn't good, then you just work on, adopting their solution, or you share solutions. And the world is really dynamic and we can figure things out, but it's really hard though to kind of know where we're going with all this in terms of where's the world moving toward when you see the tyranny that we see now. And so it's very dangerous, the road we're on. And so I sure hope that we find a different path soon, because I don't see good things in the future at the rate that things are going. I see honestly some potential for a real collapse. I don't know at what level, and I'm not sure, what company, I was going to say what companies, that too, there will definitely be companies that will go bankrupt and collapse, but more so governments, more so nation states. Are there going to be some nation states that will cease to function and collapse? Possibly in the near future. There may have to be a reorganization, a reorganizing, I should say, of how things are dealt with, how things are run, governments. What does that mean? The role of the people, the role of government. These things are kind of up in the air a little bit right now. It's almost like the governments of the world are so busy trying to micromanage business and personal lives that it's almost like government is out of control. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places in the world, it's getting that way. It's getting completely out of control. And so either the people take back the control, or they get ruled. They get ruled over. And I see right now there's a lot of people that are becoming slaves to their governments. And that's very dangerous. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for your time. I'll catch you later.